It's My Nerd World, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. This week's show, episode 155, is brought to you by Embark, the all-new science fiction space opera epic available now on Amazon.com, written by Jon Justice in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. More details much later in the show. In the show this week, what would Reylo, or what does Reylo mean for Ben Solo specifically? We'll talk a bit about that. We have a ton of listener feedback, and there will be fair warning, but we do have a massive list of fairly credible leaks for Episode 9. You do not want to miss a moment of this week's My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast. Let's get into it.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
Good job, Bob.
I love
Why did you
doing
get a blaster and I did?
this show. I
Good job,
really do. I absolutely just have so much fun doing the show every week. And it started off as a labor of love. And every single time I get to a new episode, I just kind of laugh because we're on episode 155. I can't believe I've done 155 episodes talking about Star Wars for 45 minutes or longer. But I absolutely look forward to it every single week. And especially the past month or so of doing the shows, which is really odd because we haven't had a ton of Star Wars news to get into. We got a bunch of stuff today. There'll be plenty of spoiler warnings for those that don't want to know anything about Episode 9. But I got a list of really credible, fantastic Episode 9 news. And it's good stuff, too, because it's not stuff that's too spoilery. It's more just little details here and there that kind of afford me the opportunity to open up the discussion. But it really has been exciting the past month or so doing the shows based off of the fact that I've begun writing the follow-up to my first science fiction space opera, Embark. And for whatever reason, it really has been making a difference as I've been looking more and more at Episode 9. And I think that's what it is. Because we've really been looking at Episode 9 through the lens of the other movies, and this is different than when I was writing Embark and doing the show, where we've kind of just been talking about details that we already know. But getting into the possibilities of 9 and the fact that I've had the creative juices really flowing in the follow-up to my book has provided almost another level of insight that I haven't really got into before. And that's what I want to talk about for the topic today before we get into the listener feedback, and then we dive into later in the show. We'll do the last part of the show for those that don't want to be spoiled at all. We'll get into this list of spoilers, and probably will end up being a longer show than normal. But I am really excited this week because the core topic that I want to talk about before we get to listener feedback is going to be Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, and what Reylo would mean for him. Get into his head a little bit. And again, based off of my own writing, based off of my own experiences, based off of sort of the natural direction that storytelling would go. The other thing we'll talk about before we get to listener feedback is something that I haven't spent a ton of time really discussing or talking about on the show, or even thinking about, and that is Ben Solo really wanted to be a Jedi before he became Kylo Ren. And I hadn't ever really... I'm really looking forward to the next time I watch The Last Jedi, because I don't know why that point was missed on me. I really don't. I'm so focused on Rey, so focused on Kylo Ren being betrayed by Luke that I just completely blasted past the thought that it would have been incredibly difficult for Ben Solo, considering that he was training to be a Jedi. And I almost, it was like this epiphany. It's like, oh my gosh, why has that point eluded me? And why have I not gotten into that on the show? So that's a part of what we'll be diving into on this week's show. And thank you so much for checking the show out. The responses, like I said, I got a ton of listener feedback this week, and the show just kind of keeps, the profile of the show keeps being raised further and further up. And it means everything to me when you guys reach out, and you that have been listening for a long time, and you new listeners to the show. It really has just been absolutely fantastic as of late. So thank you so much for taking time out to listen every single week. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. Now, I'm probably going to end up moving through the topic portion of the show pretty quick. I want to spend time on the listener feedback, and there's a lot to be kind of discussed, even as it relates to what I want to talk about for a few minutes in the listener feedback. And certainly if you stick around for the spoiler portion of the show, there'll be further discussions about what I'm going to discuss right now in that portion of the show as well.
Let the past die. Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
One of the many aspects that I love about Star Wars, and even just 2 movies into the sequel trilogy, is how when you head down certain lines of thought, right? Certain characters and motivations, you can go and revisit the movies and then see them in a different light, from a different perspective. I've enjoyed The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi from a Rey angle. I really, really do like her character. I thought that what J.J. Abrams did with her in The Force Awakens was fantastic. I thought that what Rian Johnson did with her and with Daisy Ridley just took it up a notch. And it's interesting, too, when you consider that Daisy Ridley has been fairly critical of her performance in The Force Awakens. And I would say that she's, grown a lot and certainly showed a lot more acting prowess in The Last Jedi. If you've watched the director in The Jedi and just seen some of those moments with Rian Johnson working with the characters. It's part of the creative process. J.J. Abrams does that too, but this was the first big movie that Daisy Ridley was working on. It gets me more excited for Episode 9, knowing that not only has her character gone through this change and the challenges of The Last Jedi, but so has the actor herself. So we're going to come back around with J.J. Abrams directing a more seasoned actor and a character that has more depth. That has me super excited. I like Adam Driver as an actor. I think he's really versatile. And I've loved his performance as Ben Solo and Kylo Ren. But I just really haven't been looking and watching these films through his perspective. And so the last few times that I've been watching, and certainly the next time I go to sit down and watch them, that's what I'm going to be focused on. And it really does take both movies. When you begin to dive into what the writers of the film, J.J. and Kasdan and Johnson, what they did with the character, what their motivation was. You go back to last week's episode and Adam Driver's comments that he knows where this whole thing is heading. And I'm more convinced now of Ben Demption, a Kylo Ren, Ben Solo redemption than I ever have been. I'm almost convinced that's what's going to happen. Again, I'm putting out the caveat there that if it doesn't, I'm totally fine with that. But that's where I think this whole thing is going. And as I've said, that could mean a number of different things, just like kind of Reylo in my mind means a number of different things. But heading into the show this week, I was thinking about Kylo Ren and Ben Solo and where potentially his head was at. I think there's a bit of a question mark here. Some of this was answered, and I certainly do lean more towards certainly an intimate connection on a borderline romantic connection, right? We haven't necessarily seen apart from the finger-touching scene, which in and of itself was very intimate. Right? I won't go down that road again and start geeking out over that scene, but we know that. Borderline romantic. I think that you can, as a viewer, interpret that however you like, and I think that was the intention of Rian Johnson when he filmed that scene. I mean, he has said that that's the closest that we'll get to a full-on love scene in a movie, so I think in his mind, he certainly knew what he was putting on there, but until we see the whole story play out, you as a viewer can certainly go and infer whatever you wish to infer in that particular scene. I do look at it as more on the romantic side, and I think you got to go back to The Last Jedi. I'm sorry, not The Last Jedi, to The Force Awakens to begin to see that from the get-go. So many people have pointed this out. This is nothing new, but the fact that Kylo Ren he can go into Rey's mind. If you're a writer, if you're going through that creative process and you begin to sort of dissect what that would mean on an emotional level beyond a physical level, I mean, that in and of itself is a very intimate thing. To be able to see into somebody else's mind. Certainly in that moment, he would know what Rey's full response to him. What was she really feeling? How horrified was she? Any level of surprise that she may have had when a monster in a mask and she removes it, and then here you have this, this dude, this young guy, this handsome guy, hair black as pitch there, not the mustache-twirling villain, certainly not deformed. That was not what she was expecting. So in that moment, in the interrogation scene, Kylo Ren is certainly going to be aware of whether or not she's already having some conflicts here of this individual who truly she doesn't like. She's being held against her will, but is now probably at a bare minimum curious about the individual, leading to that end lightsaber duel between the two of them at the end of The Force Awakens. And, Kylo's not given it all. Not by a long shot. That's always been my rationale why she was able to best him. He knew there was a connection there. He tried to bring her over in that moment. You need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the Force. Don't fight me on this, woman. Let me, obviously there's a motivation there. A bigger motivation, right? To finish what his grandfather started, to rule the galaxy. But the conflict is already building within him. So you carry that into The Last Jedi. And then you get to these scenes. And the transition through the Force shipping scenes of the connections between Rey and Kylo, he's spending more time with her. J.J. Abrams was very specific that he didn't want this to be some fancy trick. He wanted there to be a connection. He wanted them to be in the same place at the same time and wanted it stripped away of anything fancy, down to its purest form. And the progression of those scenes, they went a certain way that led to the finger-touching scene that ultimately led to, and my apologies that the sound is not off of my computer, that ultimately, of course, led to his killing of Snoke because of his belief in what he saw. But remember, the dark side clouds everything. And his attempt to bring Rey over to join him. I don't think that was just a, hey, woman, come rule with me. No, I think that was, join me. Let's do this together. Let's see where this goes. And Rian Johnson was masterful in not letting everything out. Obviously intentional. That needs to play out in Episode 9. That needs to be done for the next director, being J.J. Abrams. Prior to that, it was, Terrio. But, clearly, Rian Johnson had in his mind, at least in my opinion, this wasn't just a, hey, come rule beside me, we'll do this together, woohoo. No, man, he's got a thing for her. And to have her not give in, to have her turn her back on him in trying to get the legacy saber, right? You see that in his anger at the end of the film and how mad he is. But don't think for a second that he still won't go for Rey at the drop of a hat if given the chance. He's not speaking the truth. He's speaking emotionally when he talks to Luke Skywalker at the end of The Last Jedi. I'll destroy her and you. No, you won't. You're not fooling anybody. If Rey were to go park the Millennium Falcon off to the side, say, knock it off, you two, Ben, I'm coming with you, he'd been like, turn off the lightsaber. All right, let's go. Look, just as a dude, I know that that's the case. There's no doubt in my mind. So, for me, and this is nothing. Look, and again, this show, I do try it, and I really do appreciate how many of you point out the positivity of the show, and it's apparent in the listener feedback, especially some of the stuff this week, and I really am appreciative of that. And again, understand, you can have your opinion. This is just mine. All right, and your opinion's as good as mine because it's your opinion, and my opinion, hopefully, is acceptable to you from the standpoint of even if you disagree with it, it's my opinion. But for those that are thinking that he's going to go full dark side, I just don't see that. He may be for a while, but I think the moment that Rey begins to show some compassion and bring him over, I think that what Rey saw in The Last Jedi was the true vision. You know, I saw you turn, right? No, I saw you turn. No, I think the dark side clouds everything. I think what Rey saw was what was going to happen. And I think that's what is going to end up happening in episode 9, and what she foresaw in her vision in connecting with him was what will end up playing out in episode 9. One more quick thing, and we'll get to a listener feedback and then the spoiler stuff for the show this week. But getting back to this idea of Ben wanted to be a Jedi. I hadn't looked at the movies through this lens, and I can't wait. I may do it tonight. There's a bunch of stuff that I want to watch tonight, new stuff, but I may end up going and watching The Last Jedi just because I want to watch it through this lens. But like I said at the start of the show, I hadn't really considered the fact that Ben Solo was training to be a Jedi. He wanted to be a Jedi. Now, I haven't read any of the ancillary stuff. I haven't read Bloodline or any of the other canon material beyond the movies that gives more background into Ben Solo and what happened with that. I do know that obviously Snoke was influencing Kylo Ren from the beginning, but that doesn't change the fact that, you know, he did feel somewhat abandoned's not the right word, but he was disconnected from his father and his mother. You know, Leia was trying to do the right thing, but this was an individual who was training with Luke, who was training to be a Jedi, and then was betrayed by the very individual who was training him, at the same time being clouded by Snoke. When we head into episode 9, I through looking at the movies and looking at Kylo Ren's motivation through that lens, it wouldn't take much for J.J. Abrams to close the gap there, to bring the conflict out of Kylo Ren, of Ben Solo, if he's given the opportunity to actually fulfill his goal of becoming a Jedi and bringing peace to the galaxy at the same time. There is the issue of balance, and I do think that this next movie is going to be about balance. Rian Johnson set the stage of, you have to tap into the Force, right? To think that it belongs to one person is vanity, this type of thing. Some people are connected to it. Some people go looking for it. Others don't. I think that's going to play into the next film, but I also think this idea of bringing a resolution to this entire saga, of finally closing the loop, that's what needs to happen. And so that's where I'm really interested to see what J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio and what they had in mind, now that we know there was a plan all along, what they had in mind all along for Kylo Ren, what their intention is to close that loop, to try to bring some finality to this particular saga. There's always going to be conflict. There's going to have to be conflict. There's a rumor going around that Rian Johnson's trilogy is actually going to be set beyond, well beyond episode 9, well into the future of Star Wars, which I don't know if it's legitimate. It just it was floating around, and it was kind of it was one of those random leaks by somebody that just seemed like, well, that's an odd one to kind of toss out of nowhere. Again, sort of using your own judgment as to what leaks you're going to seem credible or to you and which ones aren't. But I really like that idea. I mean, it is a galaxy far, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It can afford you the opportunity to jump way forward in the timeline and then begin to fill in the gaps. But you got to have some conflict there. But when it comes to this 9-movie solo Skywalker story arc, they're going to have to close the loop somehow. And I'm really curious to see how they end up doing that with a redemption of Ben Solo and with Rey as well. That's probably one of the things I'm most excited about when it comes to episode 9. All right, let's go ahead and move over to some listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
I do too. And that's why I appreciate when you write to me every single week, whether it's on YouTube or to talkshownerd at gmail.com. All right, so let's get right into the listener feedback this week. First one comes from I Love Bose. Adam's comment makes me so sad because it sounds like Ben/Kylo will die. It is possible for him to be both redeemed and sacrificed, just like Vader. But I'm hoping that Lucasfilm won't want to do something so predictable and redundant. I know this death is something that I should prepare for, but I honestly don't know how. We just got this storyline, and I don't want it to end. I hope you're right about us getting only Ben redemption. Yeah, and again, I'm keeping an open mind. I don't think there's any doubt that this Episode 9 is going to end on a happy note. So, again, you make of that what you want. But, like, the one thing that's going to come out of Episode 9 is it's going to end on as happy of a note as Return of the Jedi did. Now, whether or not that causes you dread or not, depending on how you feel about Kylo Ren and Reylo, that I'll leave that up to you. All right, Across the Stars writes this. John Boyega himself said that Finn Rey was never a thing. He said, quote, "We never established a romance in 7. We never played it that way. Finn and Rey are just friends," and he recently reinforced this in a humorous tweet. "Sorry, but for that guy that wrote you, Reylo has always been the heart of the story." Yeah, there's a lot of commentary around the controversial email that I read last week. So I'm not going to go back and go over those, but an individual who was frustrated the way that some of the characters and the level of diversity had played out in the films. Go back to last week's episode 154, if you want to get caught up if you haven't heard that yet. A friend of the show, Jennifer Oliver, says, "Well, that is interesting and very telling. I had one piece of information of where it was all going." Again, quoting Adam Driver. "Okay, there's no way that this info was that Rey kills him or just that he dies, etc. Because why would an actor have to know anything leading up to that in order to develop the character? Death can happen to anyone at any time. Actors need to know what decisions and actions their character will make so that the way that they portray them makes sense when they eventually do something big, like make amends or become redeemed." That is a nice piece of info indeed, John. Thanks. Great show this week. Knights of Vader was a great time, too. Yeah, I did several weeks back. I did right at the beginning of the year. I did a lengthy appearance on the Knights of Vader podcast. If you didn't get a chance to check that out, please do. All right, The Chosen One writes this. The bad thing about bringing up flaws in movies that people love to try to convince them that a movie they don't like isn't so bad is that you end up pointing out that the movie they love is still good despite the fact that it has flaws, whereas the movie they didn't like fails to accomplish that. Very well said, The Chosen Ones. I appreciate the comment, and thank you so much for writing in. Let's see here. Let's go to, here we go. Stephen Cross Films writes this. Hey, John, I always enjoy watching your podcast, and I can't wait for Star Wars 9. I believe that Stephen Cross Films has actually started his own podcast on Spreaker, by the way. And what it will bring to the end of the Star Wars saga. I am a Reylo fan. I do agree that we will see Ben-Demption in 9. As you have said in previous episodes, the sequel trilogy is somewhat focusing on Reylo. I just thought of this recently. Anakin, or Luke Skywalker, was never able to completely destroy the dark side in 3 or 6, because pieces of the Empire, including Snoke, fled to the unknown regions after Return of the Jedi. If Kylo does turn in 9, I think he, and possibly Rey, will finish what Luke and Anakin couldn't, and that is destroy the Sith and the dark side. I think Ben will be the chosen one in 9. I can't wait for your next show. You're in the middle of it, and I hope I'm not disappointing you, Stephen Cross. Thank you so much for the comment. All right, let's go to E-Pony Reads. J.J. Abrams wouldn't be throwing it all away. This is talking to Reylo. He left clues. Star Wars is a soap opera. Soap operas are tragic, and they include fights over girls. Throw it all away is terms that are thrown around by haters. Okay. My point was, I think that what she's referring to is that... Or my apologies, actually, what they are referring to, I'm assuming it's a she, but I could be wrong about that. What they're referring to was my saying that if we don't get some type of Reylo in The Last Jedi, JJ would be throwing away what Rian Johnson did in The Last Jedi. And look, in my opinion, using that term loosely, I do believe that. Rian Johnson did set up this connection and relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey, and I do believe that that's where we're going in 9, and to dismiss that completely in Episode 9, to me, would be tossing away what Rian did in Episode 8, which, by the way, may totally work. That's just my opinion. Okay. People are right. Star Wars isn't fun anymore. People are closed off to possibilities. People are called... people are called, almost called idiots for having difference of opinions. Main characters have to have run-ins with the bad guy. That's inherent. But they aren't always side by side their allies. Rey is looking for her family, and BB-8 leads her down that path. A husband is a part in a family. I'm sorry, my message has to come this way. I'm tired and frustrated. I kept my mouth shut on the lead up to The Last Jedi, and it's all flooding out now. I preface this next question with the kindest voice. How many seconds did it take for Han and Leia to have their moment? Anakin and Padme, an entire movie with established romance, the third. I don't have cool internet sources to make my point solid, but no one knew Luke was going to vanish. And what I think that they are driving at in that comment, because they had this discussion before, is that they're fans of a Rey and Poe theory. And look, that's great. I don't have any problem with that. I really, really don't. These are just my theories, and they happen to align with a large group of individuals that feel the same way. I don't personally think that we'll be seeing any type of romantic relationship or even a really strong friendship between Rey and Poe. But if I'm wrong, man, I'll go along for the ride. I will add this point. When it comes to the haters, and I know this just from my radio job, that's not the majority. They're just the loud vocal ones. That's why I've been so appreciative. You have no idea. I've been so appreciative of those of you, including E-Pony Reads, who have emailed me and made comments about the positivity of the show, because that's something that doesn't happen nearly as often. I've done radio for 22 years. And while you do get a fair amount of individuals that tell you like the show, especially when they go and they call in, the majority of feedback that you get is either comments about the show, just about what's going on, or adding their opinion about topics we're talking about, or negativity. The negativity is almost the easier, not the default, but it's easier to do for somebody because it's emotion-based. It's easy to get people mad. It's hard to inspire and lift them up. And so it means the world to me that so many of you have reached out to talk about and tell me how appreciative you are of the positivity, because that really means that I'm accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish with this show all along. And what, to a certain extent, what the Star Wars movies do, and, we won't get into Last Jedi and the divisive nature of it, but the positivity that people have towards it is super strong and way stronger than it was for The Force Awakens. My intent with this show was always just to take time out every week to talk about my love of Star Wars and hope that along the way people would end up connecting with my own personal fandom. And after 155 episodes, I feel like I've achieved that, and that's just amazing to me. And it's because you guys write in and download every single week. Rogue 2 writes this: have you ever heard the tragedy of Supreme Leader Kylo Ren? Some people theorize that Ben Solo has always been destined to die in the dark, the opposite of Anakin Skywalker. His dark legacy will be one that will cause a constant struggle between dark and light for future stories, including new characters. Kathleen Kennedy spoiled it a little when she said there will be future stories involving these characters, Rey, Poe, and Finn, and BB-8. I'll stop there real quick. If you're alluding to that, she was alluding to the fact that Kylo Ren or Ben Solo wouldn't be a part of that. I don't take it that way. I take that to mean she clearly didn't mention Adam Driver, Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren for a reason because of how important he is to the story, which to me, that's still a coin toss. The omission is not an admission of his downfall, my opinion. Disney is planning to move away from the Skywalker movies. Yep. They need to in order for Star Wars fans to grow from the galaxy being so small, with the spotlight always being on the Skywalkers. And look, I feel like they've been doing that all along with this trilogy. I mean, that's just been the point from the get-go. All right. Athea Gaia writes this: I just found your channel and I love it. Thank you, Athea. Anthea, my bad. Anthea. I'm so horrible with these names. I apologize. You should read the names in my book. Like, I feel bad for people that go and read Embark from the standpoint of, especially the follow-up to Embark, based off of some of the names I'm coming up with. But Anthea. I will be going back and listening to your previous Star Wars podcast. To me, it's obvious what Adam is talking about. Ben Solo being redeemed and Reylo. He had to know this whole time where it was going. And I remember in a previous interview that Adam said he asked Rian Johnson if Ben had ever kissed someone before. Why else would he ask that if he didn't have to do with Ben and Rey? Who else would Ben kiss? I too loved The Last Jedi. Reylo is where it is all going. After everything that happened between these two dual protagonists, Rian Johnson's words, absolutely true, in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, it's clear where they are headed. This interview with Adam just puts an additional icing on the cake for me. They always had a plan on the general direction the story was going. You don't put a trilogy of movies together without having some direction the arc, the story is headed in. Otherwise, you can develop your characters appropriately to complete the story. Thank you so much for the comment. Really do appreciate it. That was great. Chris Ross writes this: when I went to see TFA, my daughter and I were discussing afterwards the possibility of romantic entanglements between Rey, Finn, and Kylo. The first thing I told her was Finn was out. He's so in the friend zone. That's funny. Thanks so much for the comment. All right. Chalopia W writes this: all writers like The Last Jedi, even those too much of a snob to care about Star Wars. All right, let's go to, thank you. Paige Roberts writes this: I agree they had to have some sort of endgame, and I always believed Ben's redemption was always part of that. But there's someone who still could come back, also known as Ben and Rey is the motivator. Just listening to the dialogue in The Force Awakens, it sounds like they have double meanings in so many scenes. Thank you, Paige, and I absolutely agree with that as well. Melanie W. writes this: this is a place where Reylos don't receive hate and nasty comments. Thank you for I wonder, was that a reply or they did like the sneezing emoji, so I'm a little bit confused on the context of that. But either way, I appreciate you writing in. Cass S. writes this: just found your channel, and I must say it's a breath of fresh air to find another who enjoyed The Last Jedi as well. It's so nuanced, and the cinematography is spectacular. You are right. Instant classic. All right, one more email, and then we'll dive back into the show with the spoilers for those that don't want to listen to them. I do want to take just a brief moment and mention that the show is sponsored also by Mack Weldon and MackWeldon.com, makers of fantastic clothing, better than what you're wearing right now, unless you're wearing Mack Weldon. We'll get into more details on how amazing Mack Weldon is and their entire line of clothes and how easy their website is to use in the next episode. But I do want to let you know that they're so confident that you will love their clothes at MackWeldon.com that your first order, if you don't like it, they'll give you a refund and you don't have to return what you purchased. If you go to MackWeldon.com, you can get 20% off your first order by just entering in the letters MNW for My Nerd World. 20% off your first order. And again, if you don't like it, you'll get a refund, and you don't even have to bother to return what they gave you. That's how confident they are. Again, MackWeldon.com, and use that promo code MNW. All right, Dylan, a friend of the show, writes this. I've been really bad about writing you regularly, so to make up for it, this message is a little long. No problems. I appreciate it. I had a few thoughts lately upon my recent rewatches of The Last Jedi, and I wanted to share. Firstly, I'm so excited to watch Rey and Kylo duel in 9. I'm assuming they'll have to duel before they join forces later in the movie. I'm excited for this, not only from a storytelling standpoint, but also a technical one. The choreography in the Praetorian Guard fight in The Last Jedi was so impressive, and the performances of Ridley and Driver were amazing. To see those two go toe-to-toe is going to be a fantastically dynamic scene. It's just one of the many things that I can't wait to see in the theater. My second thought has been forming in my mind for some time now, and it deals with Rey flirting with the dark side. There's so many instances in both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi that I never really hear discussed. The most obvious one is Rey and the Force Cave on Ahch-To. But throughout both movies, every time Rey fights, she dances between fierceness and flat-out rage, like the moment during the Praetorian Guard fight, which I love, where she twirls her lightsaber and screams at the guard. Admittedly, one of my favorite moments. Exactly, mine too. One scene that stuck out to me was in The Last Jedi, where Rey and Kylo's first Force ship, right as Rey is waking up in the hut. Her instinct was to shoot Kylo with a blaster. The other instance is in the throne room, where, without hesitation, she makes several runs at Snoke with a lightsaber, something Luke fought hard, long, not to do in Return of the Jedi. I have no predictions on where J.J. Abrams will take this in Episode 9, but I think there may be more to this than typically discussed. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. Thanks for putting up with my rant, and thanks, as always, for your podcast. Have a great week. Let me answer the email and your comments, Dylan, because I think you and I are really in sync with a lot of the stuff that we like. You were probably of a handful of individuals who really, really enjoyed the book I wrote. And I mean, not to say that people didn't enjoy it. A lot of people enjoyed it, but it's like you and a handful of people like really kind of got in sync to what I was trying to create. And I'm right there with you when it comes to your expectation for Episode 9, and then also Rey's flirtation with the dark side. And I think that really comes back to the idea of balance, that you can't, and maybe this actually speaks to, and I'm going to kind of go into the weeds here, and I won't spend a ton of time here, I promise, but maybe that this speaks to how they end up wrapping up 9 and the entire saga. This idea that you really can't go all the way one side or all the way to the other side. That the balance actually happens inside individuals, and that you have to accept that people are not perfect, and that Rey is powerful and has gone and teetered with both the dark and the light side, as has Kylo Ren. So maybe the finale in Episode 9 is going to be, how do these individuals rectify the fact that you can't be fully light and you can't be fully dark? I mean, that's just what it means to be human, right? And to the action and what we can expect in Episode 9, look, you're going to get that. You're going to get a major lightsaber fight. And more than likely, you're going to see some kind of dramatic, tension-filled standoff between Kylo Ren and Rey, with one of the individuals who is reluctant to move forward. I can still go either way with who that ends up being in Episode 9, along with a major ground offensive and a major space battle as well. I think that's just inevitable, and we keep hearing over and over and over again, and I guarantee that when we begin the promotion of Episode 9, once we establish, or we are being led down the road of establishing that this is the final movie in the Skywalker saga, the commentary we're going to be hearing from those involved in the film is going to be one of, the film is massive in scope. It is big in scope. This is the film that wraps everything up. With The Force Awakens, it was very much the talking point was, we're getting back to the way things used to be. We're going back to practical effects. We're using new technology to embrace that which everybody originally fell in love with the original trilogy. And then we got to The Last Jedi, it was, things are different. This movie's going to be shocking. It's not going to go the way, it's not going to go the way that you think. That was the, line of thinking and the narrative that was attached to The Last Jedi. And I think when it comes to Episode 9, it's very much going to be, hey, this is it. And we're going out in a big, big way.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, for those of you who are about to leave the show because you do not want to hear the spoilers, I want to say thank you so much for taking time out and listening to the show. I would like to encourage you to go, and if you haven't done it already, go and pick up my novel, Embark. It is a science fiction space opera. It is based on Earth, but is the first of a trilogy, and it was written out of my love for Star Wars. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in more detail a little bit later on in the show. But if you're going to leave us, I would just ask that, hey, go to Amazon.com, search for Embark, Jon Justice, and the ebook is $2.99. The paperback is $13.99, and the audiobook varies in pricing depending on what you purchase. I think the standard price for that is about $14.99, but if you purchase the ebook, you can get it for $7.50. And if you're not a big reader, then go and purchase it for a friend. It would be a fantastic way for you to help me and support the show at the same time. So if you can go and do that, thanks a lot. Again, I'll be talking a little bit more about the book at the very end of the show, but with that, I'm going to go ahead and say if you don't want to hear any leaks, then please check out the show again next week, and thank you so much. For those of you that are sticking around, let's go ahead and get into it.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
All right, so here's the deal. I talked about this particular individual several weeks ago. This was somebody who was an extra in some of the filming going on in Pinewood, and had come online and laid out a whole bunch of spoilers based off of what they experienced in shooting the film. I deem this particular individual to be rather credible, simply based off the fact that they were given a sense of validity on Reddit. So on Reddit, when somebody comes and starts presenting leaks on Reddit, they have moderators that will go and question those individuals to make sure that at least they are somewhat on the up and up. And this particular individual that posted these particular spoilers, stuff about Finn and stuff about Hux being captured, was deemed fairly credible, and so was taken seriously. Well, he is returned, and he's returned with some doozies. These are some pretty big reveals, in my opinion. Since they were released yesterday, the Reddit page, this particular post, has racked up almost 1,000 comments from people discussing what it is that this individual went and laid out. One of the moderators on Reddit did come back and say that he does put he says, look, take a little bit of a grain of salt with this. Not everything completely lines up with what they know, and some of the things that he said may be some inferring and speculation based off of what he's heard. He wasn't saying that he wasn't credible, but he was just saying, hey, take it with a little tiny grain of salt. So, like with most leaks, we don't know for sure whether or not this is completely legit. I think we're at about 80-85%, but it is some really good stuff and worthy of discussion. So I just want to put that out there. This is not for sure to be what's going to be in the movie, but this guy is credible than most of the other leaks that get out there. All right, so I've put enough, qualifiers on this. Let's dive into it. He says this: the following news is what I've accumulated from various sources around the Pinewood set. This comes from crew members from the area. Dominic Monaghan's character, it's a rebel character, and his name is Arvyl, so Arvyl. His character initially did not make it past the second act, but he has been confirmed to appear late in the film. Okay, there is a Duros character who has prominence within the Resistance. Okay, I'm going to stop here real quick, and there's a lot of people speculating, and I really, really hope this is the case, that this is Shriv from the Battlefront 2 story campaign. That character in the Battlefront 2 game, Shriv, this Duros, is fantastic. And what's really interesting about this character is that there's one level in the game where he actually spends quite a bit of time, the whole level, with Lando. So, there is a connection here, and certainly given the time frame of when Battlefront 2 came out, post Return of the Jedi, his connection to Lando, he was a compelling and funny character in the game. And I remember when I was playing the game thinking, man, this guy, Shriv, would be fantastic if he were in a movie. So, big chance that this potentially could be that character. Hux is not involved later in the film. Not to say he dies early, but his power position is diminished, and he is not a primary antagonist. Richard E. Grant plays a tyrannical First Order general, which I could totally see. The Knights of Ren, and we've been hearing this, by the way, from multiple sources, and probably the big one would be this past week on MakingStarWars.net, they laid out that they knew with pretty much certainty that the Knights of Ren were going to be in Episode 9. The Knights of Ren are certainly in the film, and their screen time is surprisingly lengthy. Matt Smith is said to have been on the set dressed in dark robes and holding a lightsaber prop. And this kind of, and again, just pure speculation based off these somewhat credible rumors. This would certainly fit in with the idea that the Knights of Ren end up becoming the wedge between the good guys and the bad guys in Kylo Ren. I've always been of the opinion there needs to be another element out there that Kylo Ren Ben Solo is going to have to figure out which side he is going to fall on. And so the Knights of Ren always fit into that. And also, with Richard E. Grant being involved, raises the stakes, as far as I'm concerned, to, all right, if we've got somebody else in the First Order who also, wants to rule or is tyrannical, and Ben Solo is struggling with his light side, dark side, that would certainly make sense. Kylo has his helmet reforged, but is more often helmetless in the latter half of the film. Okay, so we've heard that quite often. Ben pilots the Falcon. Now, that could be, I could wipe out on Ben piloting the Falcon. I think that's just something that everyone's going, yeah, I'd like to see that. A redeemed Ben, provided he makes it piloting the Falcon, would just be, something incredible. Kerry Russell is involved with Luke's storyline. Now, that's all the details that he gave in regards to Kerry Russell, and that, of course, kicks open the door for a ton of different speculation that I'm not going to get into on today's show. I'm going to kind of hold off on that and let that sit for a while, because based off of the last few details here, this could potentially go a number of ways, and I'm hesitant to go down the road of Kerry Russell being Mara Jade, them actually pulling that out and using that particular item from Legends based off of how popular that was in Legends. That's just, of course, that brings up the idea of Rey actually being a Skywalker, and I'm not saying I believe that, but I am saying that, holy cow, if they go down that road, when I give you this next little detail, that could certainly be a possibility. Okay, here's the big ones. The individual who leaked this stuff says this. Last but not least, Luke is involved in a flashback scene with Han and Leia, wherein Ben is dropped off for training to a young Luke. An 8-year-old boy, Ben. An 8-year-old Ben was cast, and he will have to talk with Luke about wanting to be a Jedi and a guardian of the good in the galaxy. And then the last item on the list here is, actually there's 2 more. Luke has shot scenes with both Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. Rey visits Tatooine. And then he put an edit in here. It says, Poe also flies the Falcon alongside Naomi Aki's Vera Calrissian, which we've heard that she was Lando's daughter. I forgot about that little tidbit. Have a great /day or night. All right, so let's spend just a little bit of time before we wrap the show up on these last couple of items. And we'll move in reverse. Rey visiting Tatooine. Okay. That's an interesting one because I can't think of any good reasons right now for her to do that. And we've discussed this idea of ending the saga on the place where we started, being Tatooine. But, honestly, there's a certain part of me that says, well, it makes more sense to either go all the way back to Naboo or to go back to Jakku. But why would we want to go back to Jakku? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I apologize. Because why does everybody want to go back to Jakku? So Rey visiting Tatooine's pretty interesting. In terms of wrapping up the saga and going back to that particular planet in the sequel trilogy, I mean, there's a lot of sense to be made about that. I'm just, right at the moment, and please feel free to comment, either talkshownerd@gmail.com or leave a comment on YouTube and let me know, sort of your thoughts on why she could possibly go back there. I mean, unless she's going back to Luke's homestead. I mean, okay, let's go there for just a second. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we've got a flashback scene here. And I posted this on Twitter, by the way. Here's a wild theory. This is just a theory, wild theory. What if, because we've now had Rogue One that started with a prologue, a visual prologue before they opened with the credits. We've had Solo that started with the blue letters into the movie, and then we got the logo, the opening title, right? What if J.J. Abrams decided to open up Episode 9 with A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, but then we open up with the flashback as a prologue? And we get this scene of Han and Leia with Luke and a young 8-year-old Ben being dropped off at Luke's academy. We know that scene was on the original shooting list for The Force Awakens, and that most likely it was shot. So that's probably what they are using in terms of footage. And when they talk about the extensive footage with Carrie Fisher, that's probably one of those shots. Because we know that before The Force Awakens came out initially, they leaked the shooting script was leaked, and there was a lot of rumors around that particular scene being shot. So more than likely, that's what they're going to use. So what if they started the movie, much like J.J. Abrams did with the 2010 Star Trek film, before they got into the opening titles, with a flashback. And then after that scene, we get the Star Wars logo, the fanfare, and the crawl. I doubt it. That would seem rather jarring, especially given that every single other film didn't start that way. Just a thought. That being said, let me get back to Rey visiting Tatooine and the Kerry Russell involved with Luke's storyline for just a moment. Okay, so what if, these are big what ifs, and I'm not necessarily saying that I even believe this. I'm just going to throw this idea out there. What if Kylo wasn't telling the truth? What if this was another certain point of view situation when it comes to Rey's lineage and her parents? And Luke was actually and continued to protect her all along. And we find out through a series of flashbacks that Luke actually was with somebody, and that was the Kerry Russell character, who also happened to be Mara Jade, and she's still alive. And maybe she's on Tatooine. Okay, I really have a hard time believing that, even saying it, based off of how far down the line we've gone. I mean, they'd really have to come up with a good explanation, okay? Lucas shot scenes with both Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. That makes sense, especially if he's playing a Force ghost, obviously. The big one here, and this goes back to the initial short discussion I had at the start of the show, and that is this idea of Ben being dropped off at Luke's academy and having a talk about wanting to be a Jedi and a guardian of good in the galaxy. And that's really what set me on the path of realizing that Ben Solo wanted to be a Jedi. And if they do that early in the film, where they establish, you know, here is a guy who was, unfortunately, in his eyes, betrayed by his master. Luke made a mistake, you know, a mistake he'd made before when he gave in to the dark side in that brief moment in Return of the Jedi on the Death Star 2, and he grabbed the lightsaber to strike down, you know, Palpatine, right? He did it again, and then it passed like a fleeting shadow, but it was too late, and he made a mistake. Hadn't thought much about the fact that Ben was training to be a Jedi at the time, and it was tainted by the fact that he was already being influenced by Snoke. So to have a scene where you've got Ben talking to Luke, talking about how he wants to be a Jedi, I mean, you're setting up for the Ben redemption at the end of the film. Again, whatever form that ends up taking. I think that there's a chance that a lot of these leaks that I just mentioned could be legitimate. He did go a little bit deeper than he did last time. Last time when he gave his information, it was very specific to the fact of what he saw on set and what he experienced. And it seems like here what he's sharing now is stuff that he gleaned from individuals also working on the movie as well. But either way, it gets me excited. And I think that we are heading into, this is going to be probably the last episode when we don't know the title for the film. This coming week, we still haven't had the Star Wars show debut for 2019. We're heading into second to the last week in January. We're bumping up against Super Bowl here in just a few weeks. The 23rd is when they released the title for The Last Jedi. They have already brought back Resistance. StarWars.com has been dumping a ton of just little tiny tidbit stuff. You can see that the 2019 machine, books and comic books and the Galaxy of Adventures, all that stuff's ramping up. The one little missing piece that hasn't gotten started yet is Episode 9. And I'm fairly convinced that this week we're going to get the title. So when we get to episode number 156, we will have that to talk about. So what do you think? Again, I'm not married to any of these ideas. It's fun to speculate. This guy's got more credibility than most leakers online, and the information's pretty good. And detailed, too. This, flashback scene makes all the sense in the world, again, considering they shot it for The Force Awakens. So, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also drop me a comment on YouTube. And thank you again to everybody who has been writing into the show. I really do appreciate it. All the new listeners as well. I would ask that if you've made it this far in the show, stick around till after the outro. And I have a couple of words about my book, Embark. But if you don't, thank you so much for checking it out. Again, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, iHeartRadio. Subscribe to any of those. We try to put a show out every single week, and I really do appreciate you taking the time, your valuable time out to listen to the show every week. It's fantastic, and I love hearing from you. So have a good one, and hopefully next week when I talk to you, we'll be able to discuss the Episode 9 title. Again, I hope you stick around after the outro. I got a few words to say about the book that I wrote. Either way, thanks for listening. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.
So, I've said it before, and for those that are new to the show, I'll say it again. I was a Star Wars fan before I was a fan of anything else. I saw A New Hope when it was in theaters when I was a kid and I was 5 years old, and have just been in love with the Star Wars galaxy and what George Lucas has created and all the content creators for Star Wars ever since then. A handful of years ago, about 4 years ago now, I had this idea for a story and decided to challenge myself. I'm a full-time radio talk show host. I've been doing radio for 22 years. Not very good with the English language or writing, and not a big reader. I read dozens of articles daily for my radio show, and I read books on occasion, but I'm not a voracious reader or an avid reader by any stretch of the imagination. But I had this story idea, and I love telling stories on the air, and I decided to challenge myself and see if I could write a story. Well, this past November, I published my first book, the first book in a trilogy. It's called Embark. It is a science fiction space opera. It is based in the future, but essentially it's far enough into the future where I was able to take some liberties in terms of technology, so it's kind of fantasy technology, to achieve what I wanted to achieve in the storyline itself. So for those completely unfamiliar with the book, here is the description, and then I have something to ask of you once the once the description is done here. In the not-so-distant future, car culture is replaced by air and space flight made possible by two of Earth's largest corporations. With the planet on the brink of an industrial apocalypse, a powerful, ruthless corporate madman, Sint Argum, moves to exploit the disaster with his covertly created military. Flight mechanic Taft Guardia spends his free time racing through the skies with his three best friends and the girl he longs to be with, headstrong Keitha Morrow. After receiving a mysterious message from her deceased scientist father, Keitha and Taft uncover a shocking secret. Knowing what they've discovered, Sint Argum will stop at nothing to find them. Time is running out for Taft and his friends. Unwittingly, with the help of a ragtag group of young pilots, they fight for humanity's survival and future among the stars. This is an exciting, fast-paced, emotional start to an all-new saga. Embark is Firefly meets Fast and Furious with the pop culture sensibility of Ready Player One with the adventure of Star Wars. Fans of science fiction techno-thrillers are sure to enjoy this epic adventure. The story is filled with mystery, romance, friendship, family, and tons of action. Some of the reviews for the book. Seriously exciting sci-fi with characters you'll love. If you like adventure, a fast-paced storyline with characters you can get behind, this is your next book. I can't wait for the next installment. This book had me hooked immediately. The reviews in the book have been fantastic, and if you've enjoyed this podcast at all and you want to support the show, besides going to MacWeldon.com, selling books is not easy at all. And right now, it's way less about making any money. The royalty rates for Amazon, you don't get a ton per book. What it is about, though, is exposure. I'm writing a trilogy. I'm 30,000 words into the follow-up book, and I may even write books 2 and 3 back-to-back to try to get them released in fairly short order. What I'm trying to do while I'm finishing up the follow-up is to keep the profile of Embark up. And obviously, in order to do that, I need to have somewhat consistent sales. And the difficult part is getting individuals to just simply go, click on it and purchase the book. So what I'd like you to do, if you haven't purchased the book yet, whether it's for yourself or you go to Amazon and you purchase it for a friend who you know is a science fiction reader, whatever device you're on, whether it's your phone or computer or whatever, or when you have a chance, but if you can right now, go to Amazon.com, search for Jon, Jon Justice, and Embark, and pick up a copy of the book. I narrated the audiobook. It's almost 12 hours long. So if you like listening to audiobooks or you're not a big reader and you want to hear me read my own story and do my own acting, you can pick up the audiobook. The paperback, if you want the hard copy, is $13.99. And again, the ebook is $2.99. And if you're on Kindle and on Kindle Unlimited already, it's available on Kindle Unlimited. But I hope you'll take a chance, and if you can, drop $3, pick up the book, give it to a friend, buy it for a friend, or just enjoy it yourself. Again, it's a really good way to pass the time while we wait for episode 9. So thanks so much for the support, and even if you don't go and buy the book, I really just appreciate you sticking around to the end of the show and listening and downloading and listening to the show every week. Again, Amazon.com, Jon Justice, and search for Embark. It'd be really sweet to pop on in the next few days and see a whole bunch of new sales. And I know you'll dig the book. People have really been enjoying it, and it's fantastic to be able to create content and share it with people. That was my whole point, was I really wanted to know what, in some small way, what it was like for George Lucas and the people that create these stories that I love so much to create new characters and new storylines and to get people engaged in it. And it's just been an absolute thrill. So I hope you like the book. I hope you take time out and go pick it up. And again, thank you so much for listening to the show. Bye.